welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and welcome back to all of our viewers and our listeners out there. We have another exciting week of discussion on Let's Talk Real Estate. I'm Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company and managing partner of Barry Saywitz Properties. And I want to welcome everybody back. I want to do a shout out for today's show, an early happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, to my dad, our guest, his kids, and everybody else out there. If you have a dad, if you are a dad, if your dad is no longer, unfortunately, with us, happy Father's Day to everybody out there. And so I'm excited for today's show. We've got what I would call sort of a triple header of discussion. We're going to talk local politics. We're going to talk county politics. We're going to talk real estate. And our very special guest is Vince Sarmiento, mayor of Santa Ana. Vince, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to join you in just echoing that we wish everybody a happy Father's Day. I miss mine, but I've got some kids, so it's great to be celebrated as we celebrated our fathers.
Yeah, for sure. So it's an exciting time. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the results of the election for the Orange County Board of Supervisors from last week. Came in first place, moving on, I guess what I'll call to the next round or the final round. And the election in November. You have a long history in the city of Santa Ana and certainly in the county as a result of that. I guess I want to start for the folks out there who aren't that familiar with you. A long-time public servant, long-time involvement in the city council and now as mayor of the city of Santa Ana. So for everybody out there, appreciate all the public work that you have done and looking forward to what you will do going forward. But relative to the city of Santa Ana, you must have seen a lot of changes over the years, both good and bad. And so how does today relate to, early on in your career, what was going on in the city?
Yeah, so first, Barry, let me just thank you for the opportunity to come on to your show, and I appreciate the invitation from you and your staff. You've been great in making this opportunity available for us to discuss. So my history in Santa Ana goes back a ways. Our family arrived in 1965, so I'm actually born in La Paz, Bolivia, in South America. So I am the only Bolivian American-born mayor of a major city in the country. So that's kind of unique history that a lot I didn't know until I assumed office. But I was appointed to the city council in 2007 and ran for election actually the first time in 2008, then 2012 and 16. And when I termed out, ran for mayor in 2020. So here I am. I started my career on the city council when the Great Recession was occurring, and finished my career as a council member as the global pandemic was starting. So I bookended both my times on the council with some pretty impactful, global impacts. But I'm not sure if I'm cursed or I'm blessed.
Yeah, well, and we'll see how it goes going forward. I hope we're not headed for another recession, but we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's been a great experience. I've seen Santa Ana evolve, to your point. So when we arrived in 1965, very different city. It's the county seat, obviously the second largest city in the county, the 13th largest city in the state. So we are a big player, not only in local politics, but statewide as well. Demographically, it's a lot different than it was. We see a lot more Latino residents. It's about 80% Latino, 10% Anglo, 10% Vietnamese. So that's sort of the rough numbers demographically. But we also, socioeconomically, we have some of the lowest average median income, not only in the county, but in the state as well in Santa Ana. So the county has evolved where, we're probably one of the more urban areas in the county. We're built out. We have about 330,000 residents in a 27 square mile area.
Yeah. And look, Santa Ana is one of the oldest cities in the county and has a long history in and of itself. But certainly in the last 20, 30 years, the evolution of some of the economic centers and the courthouse and everything else, the downtown area in terms of the shops, I guess talk about what's going on there today to sort of fast forward a little bit in terms of some of the projects that you have on board for the city.
Yeah, so I think the city's evolved. It's over 150 years old, so there is sort of a resurgence of trying to prepare the city for the future, right? So we're doing a lot of infrastructure projects, about $90 million in widening streets, improving our sewage lines, our water pump stations, because the city wasn't built for 330,000 residents when it was originally designed. So we're sort of reverse engineering what cities in South County have the blessing to do, where you can kind of fast forward and forecast what you need. Back in the 1880s, they didn't assume that we were going to have these many people with as many vehicles. So we're trying to develop areas like just for example, we're introducing a streetcar that's going to be a fixed guideway that's going to connect our train station to Garden Grove, and it's going to go right through our civic center, right through our downtown. But hopefully it'll get people out of vehicles where they can take what's called this low sand corridor, which is the Metrolink line that connects Los Angeles and San Diego. They can jump off the train station in Santa Ana, jump onto our streetcar, and go do whatever they need to do, whether it's shopping, whether it's any civic work in the courthouses or in the county buildings. So we house all the federal, state, and county buildings as the county seat for Orange County.
And this is really the first step in what I hope to be a multiple phase project, so that if this particular phase works out well and it's functional and people use it, then they'll look to expand it no different than the train lines.
Yeah, to the extent we can connect ourselves north to the resort area in Anaheim, south eventually to the airport, I think we start realizing we can connect also to Los Angeles and their system. So, it's funny how we used to have one of the most efficient public transportation fixed guideway systems in the Pacific Electric car, right? It would connect us to Riverside, the coast, Los Angeles, and those were all taken out, when cars were introduced. And so now we're putting things back where they were, 70 years ago. So, I think what we realize is that we need to have options when it comes to transportation. I'm a new director on the Orange County Transportation Authority, so I start realizing that again, we can't keep expanding freeways. We need to provide people options on being able to move around, because it does affect the quality of life for all of us here in the county.
Yeah, and coming out of COVID, you see more cars on the road, and with gas prices the way they are, people need alternative means of transportation. So that was the other thing I was going to ask you about, is in terms of the Transportation Authority, with your involvement in that, there are really some big projects on the transportation side, whether it's the 405 or widening of some of the other major arteries to just help ease the congestion, which is probably a lifelong project. But talk about that for a little bit, some of the key areas there.
Yeah, for us, we look at it also as a system, right? And it's an organization that's based upon ridership, and unfortunately, our ridership fell drastically during COVID, right? So we're in the phase of trying to reintroduce riders back to the system. In addition to large projects, as you said, on the 405, we're going to eventually widen the 55 as well, from the 5 to the 405. But yeah, I think it's also getting that trust back from the public for people to be able to feel safe getting back on a bus. So Central County, which is most of Santa Ana, some of West Anaheim, that's where the heavy ridership is in the county. So we are about maybe 80% back to where we were to pre-pandemic levels, but it is also creating that opportunity, reintroducing people who were once riders, but also introducing new riders. So there's this great program that we started off last year in the fall, which is free bus passes for students 18 and under. And what we realize is a lot of students don't want to drive a vehicle. They'd rather use public transportation if it's accessible.
Yeah.
So we gave them, passes, and now they're getting to and from school, because, kids' daily life isn't just going to school and coming home. It's staying after school. It's doing athletics. It's doing after-school programs, so they can get to and from school, to and from their jobs. But that's been a real success. That's not only increased our pre-pandemic ridership, but new riders to a system that we hopefully will be, successful.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll ask the question. So long history in Santa Ana, done very well, involved with a bunch of projects. Now turn the focus to the county, and so running for Orange County Board of Supervisors, it's District 5, if I'm not mistaken, or is it 2?
It's actually District 2.
2. So, and the whole redistricting thing confuses me all the time. But for our viewers out there who don't totally understand how it works, maybe you can explain, you'll do a better job of it, of the different districts and what they represent, and then how it goes with the election in November.
Yeah, so the county has 5 districts, and District 2 is a newly designed district that was done after redistricting. So most public agencies look at their districts or wards like they are in Santa Ana, after the census is done. So the 2020 census dictated that there was some movement in population, changing in demographics, so they designed a new central district seat, and that's District 2. So it's the first time it's been rolled out. It includes all of Santa Ana and parts of West Anaheim, parts of West Orange, parts of West Tustin, and a very small piece of East Garden Grove. So it used to be it used to be District 1 that was Andrew Doe represented the area, and it was all of Santa Ana, but it went west.
And it was much bigger geographically.
It was
right?
much bigger geographically, but it wasn't as densely populated. So that district now has moved sort of to the west, where it's Garden Grove, Westminster, Fountain Valley, to that way. So this is a new district. It's going to be an open seat, even though Supervisor Katrina Foley is sort of caretaking it right now. She sits there and represents the area, but she's going to be running for District 5, which is a South County seat, Costa Mesa South. Right.
And the demographics of this district that you're running for, your district, is heavily Latino oriented, right? And so different needs and wants and desires than somebody in another part of the county.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I know that the county received some information from the Attorney General's office and basically saying you now have 33% of our residents in Orange County are Latino, and you don't have a board that reflects that demographic, right? So they saw that they were potentially in violation of what's the California Voting Rights Act and the Federal Voting Rights Act. So they designed a district that's now 64% Latino. It, as I said, encompasses all of Central Orange County, and hopefully there'll be some more broad representation of who we are in the county and the face of Orange County, especially since our family's been here and for so many years, really has evolved, right? I mean, it's younger, in many pockets it's more diverse, and the industries have changed as well. So I think these new districts have been designed that way, but District 2 is uniquely urban. It's uniquely maybe not as a little bit more park poor than some of our other districts that have the coast and have some more open space. So that's going to be one of my goals. And again, a lot of people ask, well, you just became mayor, why are you running for supervisor? I just saw a lot of challenges as I became mayor, because the relationship between the county and cities within District 2
it's
just
a push-pull
weren't as great.
sometimes, right?
It really is, and it's all based upon relationships, because the county receives funding from the federal and state government and doles it out to the 34 cities within the county. So,
and so what do you see as some of the major issues? I know we've had other folks on the show, and certainly the economy is a big one, and where the economy goes in general, I think will have a dovetail effect as how it trickles down to the state and the county and the individual cities and the individual people on a day-to-day basis. And so when you have a very volatile stock market, when you still have supply chain issues, you have employment issues, you have rising interest rates, I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer, but there's a lot of things going on in the world today that are brewing for what may be a very difficult, challenging time ahead. What are the key issues that you see going forward for the county?
After canvassing for the past 6 months, the issues were fairly thematic and revolve around the delivery of public health, which is a core function of the county. Also, how do we deal with the increasing number of people who are homeless, and open space and public safety. Those are the 3 or 4 issues that are really dominant in people's mind. Homelessness, because a lot of people just see the impact of so many people on the street. And I think when it comes to public health and the delivery of that, we just lived through a global pandemic where we realized a lot of mistakes were made. In Santa Ana, we lost over 1,000 lives, and we didn't have to lose those 1,000 lives. I think there were preemptive decisions that we could have made in advance and been able to deliver services equitably. I think been able to provide resources in ways that people could access them, but there were a lot of stumbles, a lot of mistakes that I think cost, again, not just people dollars and cents, but actual family members.
And so as part of the solution going forward to build public health facilities or expand what you have existing, or create a bigger network, or how do you foresee it going?
I think maybe it's just reassessing what our delivery system looks like, because it's funny because Orange County doesn't have a central hospital, right? A central county hospital. And if you look at LA County, you look at most counties, they have a hospital where most of the services are delivered from. We have a network of clinics, and that always lends itself to just not being as broadly, helpful to providing that care. So I think, the systems of CalOptima and other areas, for me, need to be looked at and revisited, because I think that people were having trouble accessing information, accessing resources. So it is kind of looking at our county uniquely different from LA County, San Diego, and others, because we are one of the, we're probably the fifth largest county in the country. And so we do have some challenges now where you don't have people that maybe connect to the internet. So, I mean, we see that as a given that you can just push out information, by a website. Many people in Santa Ana, I saw about 10,000 families were just not connected to the internet. So how do you get information to those folks that are vital? I mean, they're life and death, questions. So those are the reasons why I was kind of moved to run for the county, just because I think we need to connect communities that maybe are disconnected from the county.
And so how does that, the other issue I guess everybody talks about is homelessness and public safety, right? And so we had Sheriff Don Barnes on a couple of weeks ago, got his perspective on things, and we've had other political figures come in, and it seems to be just a recurring issue. I guess start with the public safety side of it. What is your view with respect to that? Do you defund the police? Do you provide public safety? Do you expand it? How do you see it going?
Yeah, I think the whole, terminology of, defunding police is sort of a misnomer. I think it was, used and kind of manipulated and distorted by others. I think it's reassessing how we provide effective law enforcement. For me, we need qualified officers to be able to enforce the law fairly and equitably. That's really the goal that I think most mayors have. We want to make sure that response times are short. We want to make sure that the encounter that law enforcement has with our public is a respectful one. So, there needs to be training. There needs to be, officers that can speak in people's native languages as well, because sometimes you're at a site, and if you can't communicate with a victim or a witness, it makes things very difficult. So I don't think it's a matter of defunding anything. I think it's a matter of making a more effective law enforcement effort. I think we also want to hold, folks accountable. I'm an attorney. I am monitored by the state bar. And if I, perform any sort of malpractice, look, my license could be taken away from me. We also want to make sure that officers are held responsible for mistakes that they make. And we know it's a difficult job. My brother-in-law was an LA deputy county sheriff, and he lost his life when he was 33, so we have personal loss in our family. We know how difficult it is, but nonetheless, we also have to make sure that we have people who aren't reckless or irresponsible enforcing the law. That's a lot of authority that we base and trust in them. So I think it's a balance of making sure we have well-trained officers to be able to effectively enforce the law.
And then the homeless side of things, right? Part of that is you have law enforcement that takes away from their time of fighting real crime, dealing with homeless issues, dealing with incidents, which are, not that they don't need to be dealt with, but it takes away from some of maybe the bigger, more important things. Is there a solution to the homeless scenario? Is it really just a question of trying to manage it? It's an ongoing issue, certainly everywhere. And how do you do that? I know the governor has said, hey, we can take motels and convert them into, homeless shelters. I'm not sure that's really a realistic scenario for Orange County, just based on the dynamics of the real estate. But is it getting people off the streets? Is it building homes? Is it giving them a place to go? Is it treatment? Is it all the above?
I think it's a combination of things. So when you spoke about just the interaction between law enforcement and folks experiencing homelessness, officers aren't trained for that. That's not really their function. So what we've done in Santa Ana is we've employed a civilian team that are better trained. They're called CityNet, and they're folks that can provide care when a person's going through crisis. So a lot of people who are homeless, and I'm a bankruptcy attorney, so I know that when trauma affects a person's life, whether it is, loss of, a loved one, a loss in career, or being priced out of a market, whatever the case is, you end up on the street. Then you get preyed upon by, folks who see that, you're receptive to maybe, substance abuse, and then it just becomes a spiraling problem. One of the things I know that we have seen that's effective is having civilian teams go out and deal with folks who are experiencing homelessness. But what we saw in Santa Ana is unfortunately other cities that would bring their homeless population to us.
Really?
And as the county seat, as sort of an urban area, and we house the men's central jail. So you'd cite somebody where it would be normally a cite and release. They would take them into men's central. They'd be released in the middle of the night, and they become Santa Ana's problem.
Yeah.
So there also is a fair share argument to be made that, look, all communities should be able to handle or be responsible at least for their populations. And what we've done is we're about to open up a 250-bed shelter in Santa Ana, so we can now start enforcing what's called anti-camping ordinances. So it affects businesses directly. You have homeless populations that'll just camp out and private properties, and you can't do anything about it if you don't have a bed to place them at or some sort of placement. So with our shelter, we're hoping we can start enforcing that, and hopefully we'll see some relief, because growing up, that wasn't my lived experience to see or have to walk over or walk through a homeless encampment. And unfortunately, areas like Santa Ana that are lower income, unfortunately, tend to bear the burden.
Yeah,
of that.
and if you have public grounds and people tend to congregate there, there's sort of less impact. Which I guess I'll use that as an entree to dovetail into sort of our real estate. We'll shift gears for a second, and so the real estate market over the last several years everywhere really has shot up. So rents have gone up, property values, home prices, commercial prices, you name it, everything's up. Nothing goes up forever. I know that from living through multiple turns in the economy, and so we'll see what the future brings. But as the prices go up and as rents go up, it makes it more difficult for folks at every level to be able to afford to do what they need to do. And then certainly for the folks on the lower end of the spectrum, it's more impactful to what they're doing on a daily basis, which is the folks in your jurisdiction to a large degree. So I want to have you discuss a little bit about the rent stabilization ordinance, what the history was and how it came about, and then what the pluses and the minuses are for both sides of the stick, the landlord and the tenant.
Yeah, so I think we have probably over 50% of our residents are tenants and renters, right? So we knew that was a large segment of our population, and we saw a lot of displacement occurring where there were landlords that were spiking rents. And I'm not saying all landlords are bad actors. My parents were landlords, and they had units and never increased the rent on anybody, especially if somebody was a good tenant. You figured somebody is sort of caretaking your property, and you want to keep folks like that. Unfortunately, we saw with rents going up and the pressure and property values going up, this was impacting that population directly of renters. So the relief was, we had some relief. There was a rent stabilization statewide measure that I think capped it at 5%, and I think with CPI went up to about 8%. We realized that still wasn't preventing our folks from being displaced, and it wasn't just to protect tenants or harm landlords. It was really to stabilize communities, because what we saw is that families would be leaving neighborhoods. They'd leave them dormant, and a lot of our families are kind of codependent on one another. They're first-generation immigrants, right? So they kind of depend on one another and their communities and their neighborhoods. And once you start destabilizing that, it can destabilize economies, it can destabilize the city. So what we've seen since the rent stabilization has been in effect, there's been a calmness in our population. There's been sort of much less displacement, and we see other communities unfortunately going through some more erratic changes where you see rents going up. And just for me, I have 3 kids, as we were talking about. I don't know if they'll be able to purchase a home when they come back to Santa Ana, right? Because the price of land and the price of a home is so expensive, and even rents. And when we started realizing the average rent for a new 1-bedroom construction is about $2,500 in Santa Ana, our sometimes our families are making wages that are minimum wage, and there is no way that you're going to be able to stay in a community or have kids that can come back to a community that can afford to live there. So that's the balance we were trying to strike. We also passed what's called an affordable housing ordinance, which is the housing opportunity ordinance, to create more housing, because we think that that's going to be another way to provide relief, create more inventory, more supply, and hopefully it'll adjust prices and make some opportunities available for our families to stay.
And it's I'm going to say it's at the forefront of what I'm going to call rent control or capping, or however you want to term it, because you do have the state cap that's in place for everybody. And there's really only a few places in the entire state that have their own city ordinance of the rent control: Long Beach, Santa Monica, San Francisco, and now Santa Ana. So I think other cities are watching it very closely to see how it affects not only the demographics and the changes or not within the community, but also how that affects the real estate prices. And so to me, as a landlord, I obviously have a different view in some respects, but not to be argumentative about it. I think there's pluses and minuses. Certainly the pluses are you stabilize people, you don't have them have change. At the same time, the question then becomes, what does that do to the property values in the community? Because theoretically, if someone was going to raise the rent, they would fix up the property. You would hope, right? You'd hope they wouldn't just put paint and clean the carpet and then raise the rent. But it sort of disincentivizes remodeling. It disincentivizes upside. And then when properties do ultimately go to sell, then they are capped at a price, and they would theoretically be at a lower price than a property that didn't have the rent control. And so I like the idea of the redevelopment. I like the idea of the new development because it gets new product in the market and it brings new people into the city.
And by no means do I think it's an ideal situation, but sort of not having the stabilization in place wasn't working either. So we're trying to find a good sort of common ground. One thing I will tell you on redevelopment, there is a carve out for those that are going to invest in their property, so they become exempt. Right. So if you do,
and also newer properties are exempt as well, right? The way I understand the ordinance.
So there are some. I mean, we're just seeing a boom in applications of folks wanting to develop properties because we just amended our general plan and we have 5 focus areas that are going to relax a lot of the restrictions and almost have it by right. As well, and we're going to be doing the CEQA analysis for them. So I think there's going to be an offset to maybe investment and maybe that fear of folks not wanting to come into the town. But we're hopeful we're striking that balance where we can take care of our residents that are there, but at the same time invite investment as well.
Yeah, and I think that I think it will spur more redevelopment and more remodeling and significant upgrades. And so I think that is one of the positives. And then at the other side of it, nobody anticipated when you put this in place that you'd have inflation at 8.5% and that you'd have everybody's cost of supplies going up dramatically. And so the flip side of it is, as a landlord, you've got trash going up, you've got the pool guy going up, and fences and wood and all these other things go up. It's sort of hard to keep pace. And it'll be interesting to see if we're in a short-term rise in all of these things with the economy and whether what the government and the Fed are doing with interest rates will slow it. My concern is if it doesn't, then you're going to start to see things get away from you.
Yeah. No, I mean, and look, I'll put my econ hat on from undergrad. I do think that this was sort of an artificial, self-inflicted, recessionary period, sort of post-pandemic, because of the money that was injected in the economy. I mean, that was, record amounts, right? And so a lot of folks really did, maybe hold the money, and now they're spending, and they're just, really increasing that demand and the supply for factors beyond our control and things that kind of unfortunately all converged at one time are creating this tension. But we're hoping it is as we went through this, we'll get out of it in a shorter period of time as well.
Yeah, and I studied economics as well, and so it's interesting dynamic as you watch things. And we both lived through the challenging time of the last recession and watching things crumble on from the real estate perspective, as well as jobs and other things. So you go from one extreme to the other. You feel like you're just pulling out of COVID and you're getting your hat back on and you're trying to take some steps forward. And it'll be interesting to see how the next few months evolve.
Yeah, I guess the last plug I'll make is that what the lessons we learned during the recession, we didn't have a fiscal reserve in Santa Ana. So I was floored when I got on the council and I said, okay, well, what happened? Where's sort of your rainy day fund if some crisis occurs? There wasn't one. Yeah. So now we have a fiscal reserve that is above 18%, which is I think the minimum is 16 or 15. So I'm real proud of that. I'm real proud of the fact that Santa Ana was once the hardest hit city. Now we've got the lowest positivity rate, some of the highest vaccination rate in the county, and we have a $40 million reserve, or not a $40 million surplus. So, those are things I think you learn when you go through a crisis like the recession. It teaches you to be prudent, teaches you to be responsible. So I'm hoping that that's something I can bring to the county when we get there, because I know it's important to be able to help, but at the same time be able to manage well.
Yeah, and I remember the days when the county was bankrupt and didn't have any money as well. I feel like they're in a better place today, hopefully, to stomach a recession as well. And I'm hopeful that your involvement, whether it's at the county level or continued with Santa Ana or both, allows it to continue to grow and take some of the things that you've learned and accomplished where you're at and take it to a bigger level.
So I'm a former bankruptcy attorney as well, so that helped when I got on the council.
Yeah,
so
digging out of a hole.
Look, I was calling colleagues about Chapter 9s, which are very rare, and you're right. I mean, Orange County's was the largest bankruptcy in the country. At that time. Unfortunately, we haven't had many others, but you see cities like Vallejo, cities like San Bernardino that had no choice but to file. But those are consequences that, look, they're going to live through for decades. It isn't something that, you kind of file and, you're done with it in a year or two. It affects you in a very, very long-term way.
And Orange County as a whole is known for tourism and real estate are two of the biggest sort of industries. We have the nice weather. That's why most people are here. It's not the cheapest place in the world to live by any means. And so the perception that the county is a good place to live and that it's stable, the perception that the city is a good place to live and it's stable helps bring new people, helps bring new growth and diversity to the community.
100%. I think that all of us have to be stewards of that, the opinion that this is a good place to not only live and work, but also to visit and travel. So we do, we're blessed with having, the topography, the climate, being a coastal county. We're so close to a foreign country. We can go, skiing in the morning, go surfing in the afternoon, go to a desert that's, an hour and a half away. So we have so many assets around us and within the county that, sometimes we don't realize. I mean, I know I don't appreciate it as much until I travel. When I travel, I'm dying to get back home.
Right.
Exactly. And you realize, look, we don't miss anything. We're not, we have everything, within an hour from us. So
for sure. So we just have a minute left. In terms of the election, it's in November. I know that from what I read, at least, voter turnout was not the greatest across the board. So what would you advise for our viewers and our listeners out there? I think the short answer that I would tell people is get out and vote, but how do you get people out there and get them mobilized? I mean, if it's important to you, you should vote.
Yeah, I think it is. And what's a little embarrassing is we're having a tough time breaking 20%. So I don't want to be self-serving and say go vote for me. Just vote.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important for all of us to exercise that right. And we live in a community and a country that many people sacrifice their lives for this privilege. And so I'm hoping all of us take it seriously, responsibly. Just go out there and exercise your voice, and that's important.
Yeah, and you hear people complain, whether it's around the coffee pot or around the dinner table. If you didn't vote, then you didn't exercise your right to make a difference.
It's tough to complain when you don't participate.
Yeah, so I complain all the time. Nobody listens, but that's how it goes. But well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your thoughts and your views for both the city and the county. It's a pleasure to have you, and I certainly wish you and your family continued success, and I wish you success in the election in November. And so how can people reach you or find out more if they want to find out more about what you stand for?
Yeah, so right now we have a website that's called Sarmiento for Supervisor, and that's probably the easiest way to access me, access information. And that's probably our busiest platform. But I appreciate you, Barry. I thank you for the kind discussion. I think it's a good one, and I think we need to have more of these because unfortunately we're just not communicating sometimes. And I think that's what we see at the national level. Sometimes we see it at the state level, but in the county, look, all politics are local. The more people have conversations like this, I think the better off we are.
Yeah, and practical solutions to practical problems, right?
100%.
So, listen, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the show. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company and managing partner of Barry Saywitz Properties. Thanks to everybody for tuning in this week. We will be back again next week with more talking real estate. I want to thank our team here at OC Talk Radio, Paul and Sophia and the entire crew. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.